I'm really enjoying the latest season of Dungeons and Daddies, and I'm really enjoying the character of Scary, who is a goth warlock.
We love it.
So maybe that's what's going on here. Maybe that's who I'm being. Maybe I'm just, channeling into my little you know, teen self of like, I don't want to be here, but I do want to be here because I'm really excited about what we're going to talk about today.
Maybe she's born with it, or maybe it's just Scorpio season.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey everyone, my name is Jared.
And I'm Autumn.
And we are Coaches and Dragons.
Coaches and Dragons.
And this video, we're really excited to introduce you to our guide to the wild side. So at Coaches and Dragons, each month we try to pick a theme. Sometimes it's inspired by mechanics from our favorite RPGs, and sometimes it's inspired by our favorite classes. And this month we're diving into Druid.
Yay! I know you were very excited about this month. As soon as we landed on Druids, we both got excited, but I think you had a super shimmery crown that was forming around you.
Yeah, I love Druids. And, we've done Wizards, we've done Bards, we've done a lot of the martial and fightery classes. And what I love about Druids is there's just so much to pull from, and they're kind of quirky as a class. There's so many different kind of inspirations. Their mechanics are kind of off, and they're one of the few classes that actually uses a lot of nature magic. And, there's different different classes and stuff that riff on that, but they just have a very unique place, I feel in D&D especially, and a very different point of view compared to some of the other party members that might be more into a grimdark fantasy setting. I am the ranger, they're probably the most outdoorsy person, but they've still got a little bit of a monster hunting chip on their shoulder, versus druids might range from I will destroy all of civilization to oh my god, isn't this squirrel so cute? We should talk to it for a hot 5.
I mean, I've never played a druid, but in my first game ever, my husband played a druid, and I remember being incredibly jealous of his ability to wild shape, and I was like, I want to turn into other animals, and it just felt like such a cool skill. And so I feel like I'm definitely going to play a druid at some point. I really want to experience what that is like, but I don't know when that's going to happen.
Yeah, same here. I think the fascinating thing with druids is they do have wild shape. They have access to this nature magic. They have so many different abilities. And I think that's really interesting where they play in D&D is they have a much more of a support utility or infiltration function, right? They can become a squirrel and get into the camp and infiltrate the castle, or they can cause giant plants to grow in obscure pathways. They can pull in and change the weather.
So why do we care about bringing druids in to help us all learn and grow as people?
Yeah, well, I think let's start with the features of a druid, right? So if we're trying to learn from a druid and where we can apply D&D or any sort of RPG that uses a druid to real life, I think wild shape is a pretty iconic feature, that ability to change form into a beast of a certain class. I think the access to nature magic and their specifically the ritualized connection to it, how do they connect to it? How do they build community and kind of a cultural identity around nature? And I think some of the other things, just their ability to attune with, sometimes they're connected more to the Feywild. And again, that's still this very wild, chaotic, nature-based magic. I think there's just a lot of different phenomenon. And I think a lot of phenomenon that we forget is nature-based. So one of my favorite druid subclasses is the Circle of Stars druids, and the fact that they pull from astronomy and the stars and the celestial bodies. There's something that we forget about our earliest civilizations. They looked at the stars for guidance and for wisdom and to chart paths, and now it's astronomy and astrology and all these different wisdom traditions coming together. It's very druidic in flavor. And then you also have the mystery of Stonehenge and all these different monuments that are embedded in nature, made of nature, but you're from a modern human perspective, I don't know what the hell that is.
Yes. Yeah, it is. I mean, I definitely, when I think about druids, I very much think about that connection in with nature, that respect of nature. It's thinking about systems, and it's not, I don't think about druids as kind of being selfish or paying a lot of attention to themselves, or they recognize the whole. They
Yeah.
recognize the connection, how everything plays together. And I think there's something about that that really speaks to me. With my number one value being village, essentially community, there's this thing of like, yeah, when you do one thing, there is a ripple effect, there is a connection that, and we can all feed off of each other. And so I think that's something that really interests me a lot when we think about druids and how we can learn from them, is this thing of like, there are these systems that play, there is this connection within all of us, and we can be in tune with that, and it can absolutely impact how we're feeling. We're getting ready to go into winter here. Seasonal effectiveness disorder is absolutely a thing that a lot of people talk about, a lot of people experience, right? It's that thing of like, what happens in nature around us can absolutely impact how we are and how we be, how we feel.
Yeah, and I think more so than any other class, with again the exception being the ranger, but they're kind of cousins in some ways. They really rely on being part of the environment. And I think that's why there's sometimes like a trope of like, how do you play a druid in a city? Which we did an earlier blog post, like talking about how would you actually infuse more of the natural world or these natural perspectives into, even if you do live in a city, right? If you think of cars as the salmon swimming upstream, if like the traffic's really bad, there's different ways to bring that point of view to it. But druids definitely are mostly attuned to the environment and trying to figure out how the environment impacts what they're doing, but then also how they can kind of almost co-create the right situation with the environment at hand. And characteristically, they're very much positioned against what we'd consider like more like modern or human or civilized systems. I'm using air quotes because there's all kinds of connotations with that. But they're like looking at these systems around and being like, "Ooh, don't think that's correct. Don't think that's sustainable. Don't think that's resilient. Not sure that's going to help us in the long term." And like animals and flora and fauna have like had this figured out for a long freaking time. And maybe we shouldn't like draw a line between like human and beast. Like maybe we can blur it a little bit. Maybe we can shape change a little bit. And I think that's where like a lot of the druid magic comes from.
In coaching and in Coaches and Dragons, we talk a lot about perspective shifting. And so I love kind of looking around and saying, what can I take quick inspiration from to give me a perspective shift? I need to just like, first thing my eyes land on, how can I take that as perspective? So if I look out here, I see a big tree right now, most of the leaves are gone, but I might say, ooh, there's a bird on the tree, or there's a trunk in the tree, or there's roots in the ground, and there's what it's the leaves feeding. And so I can look at all these different parts of just looking right out my window and say like, where is my trunk? What is my leaves falling? What am I nurturing when my leaves fall? Right? There's all these things. And so like, I love kind of what you were talking about in this thing of like, there's so many amazing things that we can look at for inspiration for different perspectives, because this works in nature. These systems that nature has, they are working. So why not look at that and say, what's the metaphor of that system in my life?
Well, and to give a really practical example, a tree is actually how I love to start a lot of my meditations, right? So if I'm like sitting down and I'm getting ready to like, do my meditation time, it's part of my self-care practice. I go through that process of like, am I rooted? Are my roots reaching in? Like, do I feel anchored, right? How is my body like connecting to the ground and paying attention to all those sensations? And then I move up and I like look at the branches, like where am I open? Where am I lifted? Where am I relaxed? Where am I like able to like connect and, feel out to those thoughts, but not get tangled up in them? And then finally I go to the trunk, the tree. Where am I relaxed? Like, how is my spine feeling in this moment? If I'm going from, crown to toes, doing that body scan of checking in on the trunk, how am I feeling? What's present? What's going around? And it's a great way to use a natural inspiration as a visualization to like feel grounded, feel centered, and like ready to do the rest of my meditation, which is it's practice in itself. But having that visualization helps me connect more into my personal experience, because it's finding the right language as an outlet for it. And I think that's a very like practical tool, which is why I think I was most excited when we decided to do druids and this guide to the wild side, because we talk about all these different ways to, if it's not even just taking on a different perspective, to see things differently, to challenge our assumptions. We talk a lot about in one of our sessions around this, our relationship to time. How do you measure the seasons? How do you measure the passage of time? Are you looking at Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4, or is it spring, fall, summer, winter? Or do you look at it from this idea from Japanese culture of micro seasons?
Oh.
There's so many different ways to just understand how we're marking the passage of time, whether it's inspired by the natural world or inspired by our own demarcations, right? Astrology is another way to measure the passage of time. Like it's Scorpio season. Like that would be very much a way to be like, I know what time of the year it is. Like that has nothing to do with, the state of leaves on the tree.
There's so many different ways that we can watch the ebb and flow in these cycles of our life. But I love that like thing of what season are you in? Because right now, as we're recording this in Virginia and Georgia, we are in fall or autumn, whatever you want to call it. But if I were to like take that as a metaphor and think about it, and I think like, what season am I in right now? I feel like I'm in spring right now. I'm doing a
Mm,
lot of recreation. I feel like there's a lot of things sprouting. But I can see a point where when I think about being in fall, where there's a lot of like nurturing that's happening, there's a lot of settling, there's a lot of comfort and care that's happening, and getting ready for what's gonna come in winter. I think more about hibernation, and then that spring is gonna hit. So, um, even though it is literally fall, I feel like I'm in springland right now.
yeah. And I think that comes to, harvest connotation too, right? This idea of like it's bountiful, it's plenty, it's abundant, which has a very much a parallel to spring.
Mm.
So some of the other things I think we talked about in the wild side. So we've talked about wild shape, which I think we did a really kind of fun kind of take on that. And like you said,
Oh
what if
yes.
I was like a honey badger? Like how would they behave in certain situations?
Yes.
And that's something that we do naturally all the time, right? If you're like
Mm-hmm.
smart as a fox, if you're in mama bear mode, if you're an owl and you just simply give a hoot, like those are all
Ooh.
ways that, pop culturally, we already do the wild shaping, right? We're using it as a metaphor, we're using it as an extension.
Mm-hmm.
Eyes like a hawk is like a druid's dream, right? I can see super far out and I'm gonna let you
Mm-hmm.
know exactly what's up.
Here's what I will confess to. I feel like because we have this really awesome roll table for the Wild Shape Week about all these different wild shape forms you can take, and my favorite one on that list is the quokka. I love it. It's so freaking cute. If you do not know what a quokka is, y'all, look it up. I swear it's like gotta be what appears to be the happiest animal on the planet, but I feel like just the idea of being anything that anybody would seem to be like, oh, yeah, I love it. I'm here for
Yeah.
that.
I
Quokka.
feel like if I was to wild shape, I would 100% do a Puss in Boots moment where it would be like a cute cat and it's like big eyes, big moon eyes, and then like shift back and like do whatever you need to do to get out of the situation. Or maybe I just like screw people over as a cat. Paws out, we go to town. I think one of the other topics that I was really excited about too that we were able to touch into the wild side, and I think it challenges the assumption of what we consider to be wild, right? And what it means to be wild, what it means to be free. Like wild shape, obviously, wild in the name has some connotations playing with this idea of like, what is a beast? What is it not? Where do we start to embody different animals? But I think when we look at, again, our broader relationship to the natural world, two of the themes that you and I really honed in on specifically for druids was this idea of like nature's ability to reclaim, right? And it
Mm,
kind of
mm-hmm.
pays homage to this broader reverence that druids have of the life death cycle. So like historically in fantasy genres, druids are against any like undead or forces that would put the elements out of balance. And
Mm,
the idea being that it's, nature's right to take over the castle if it's like no longer being used, right? That's the first thing to lay claim to the ruin because it's a dead thing now being composted and turned into another live thing, right? That perpetuation of that cycle and priority over the cycle over, say, perpetuity if you're a lich or that sort of thing. And the elementals, which was another kind of fun, again, digging back into like what makes a druid, what makes nature magic, and historically speaking, like elements have always been kind of a part of our culture and even like pop culture, right? If you look at Avatar: The Last Airbender, you can make an argument that they're all just like super specialized druids.
talk about like nature reclaiming itself. Like I think there's this thing sometimes when we look out, especially if you're kind of in a plane or you're on a skyscraper looking down over Earth, you're like, oh my gosh, what happened? Like we've totally taken over all of nature, we've taken over the planet, it's concrete everywhere. And there's this thing of kind of like we've destroyed it all. And I look, there's definitely arguments to be made about very negative impacts that we've had. I think there's also this thing that I think about of kind of like we feel like we have all this power and all this stuff, but it's like nature's like, come at me, bro. What do you have? Like,
Yeah.
you can plan this amazing outdoor event, and then nature's going to be like, how about a little rain? How about some wind? Or it can be like, oh, that's really cute that you spent all that time putting that asphalt down to have that really nice driveway. How about I give you a little crack? And how about if we have some plants growing through, right? Or how about if you have to go and mow your freaking lawn every week? Like, y'all, nature has you like grabbed. You have to when like you have to go and water things. You have to go and mow the lawn every time. Nature's kind of like, I feel like you're kind of here doing stuff. We're just going to keep coming.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think as a former architect, I can tell you a perspective you can take on architecture is how to keep nature out. Like, how do I keep water from damaging my structure? How do I keep the soil from screwing up my foundation? How do you like handle wind and fire and literally everything that is trying to destroy your house and your place of habitation?
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, you consume resources to also destroy the environment versus like what used to happen historically in architecture is houses were naturally passive. Why? Because you didn't have air conditioning. You didn't have like all these other things. So you were forced to build in alignment with the environment. You had no choice because if you didn't have daylight in your space. You didn't have access to like fresh water or air or all of the things that we appreciate in a home and in the natural environment.
Mm.
So, Autumn, as we're talking about the wild side, any final thoughts, anything you're really excited for folks who want to dig in to our guide to the wild side or just be curious about the Druid?
Yeah. I mean, I'm really excited about this one in terms of like getting into this and seeing how you can learn from the nature that's all around you. You don't have to pay a lot of money for things that will change your life. You don't have to go and buy all these objects. You don't have to go to these other locations. Sometimes you can just look out your window or look up at the sky, or just look out at the plant growing out of the crack in your concrete and take some inspiration from all that's around you and how you can learn about yourself and grow and just enjoy your life and enjoy what's all around you.
Yeah, I think for me, the most exciting thing about our guide to the wild side is just giving yourself the opportunity and the freedom to connect to whatever feels wild. And so often we like think of these structures or discipline or I need rules or ways to do things and we want like guardrails and instructions. And what if you just like gave in to a little bit of like what comes naturally? What do you see in the environment around you? Like what makes you feel bigger, more wild, more free? Like what does that like beast inside you really want to do right now? And leaning into that. And I think that is the spirit of the Druid. It could be a bunch of like, hey, you can't do this because like that's bad for nature. If you want to play a rules lawyer Druid, go for it. But I want to see the Druid that is wild, that is free, and living their best life because I think that's really what our guide to the wild side is all about. So with that, hope you guys all enjoyed our commentary. If you want to check out our guide to the wild side, you can check out the link in the description below. Follow along with us for the month of November to see what we have in store as we dive a little bit more into the Druid. And until next time, remember, chaotic good vibes only.
Ooh, chaotic good vibes only. And don't forget to like and subscribe.
Ciao.
Bye. How confident must they be? To just be like,
I don't know if it's confident. I think they just like, they're cats. Like they're in it. They're like, they're themselves. Like they're almost verging on like the worst kind of commitment to authenticity where like, they're like, I'm just being myself. And it's like, I just do these things. And it's like, that's not authenticity. That's harm. That is like a fixed perspective of who you are.
Yeah, but I also just want to be like, yeah, and you also sat there in front of a group of people and licked your butthole.